you realize that I'm evacuating something bad. I didn't want it. Why are you giving it back to me? And I think, so I'm thinking about that. So when a client is in, because it starts as a baby, but when a client is in that position where they're evacuating all this bad, but they really don't want you to say anything about this psychic experience of I'm evacuating all the bad. They believe they're actually feeling good because they're just evacuating the bad.
Exactly.
And I've been struggling with the client. I only see him once a week, but for several, I'm going to say months, I've been feeling really that all he's doing is evacuating the bad, because my countertransference every time I haven't always been this way with him, is like, ugh.
Yes.
And he's feeling wonderful.
Exactly.
I'm getting better. I'm making better decisions. I'm not getting deflated when things don't work out. And I'm sitting here going, ugh. But he doesn't want me to tell him about this bad that he's evacuating. So I'm kind of like, now what do you do with it?
Right.
Because if I say anything to him about it, oh, then it's a whole shit whirlwind gets stirred up in the session.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, in any case, I hope this responds to the question.
Yeah. Anyway, that's off on a
Right.
tangent.
Good.
So sorry.
There is one more thing I want to say, but I don't want us to get stuck on this for too long,
We won't say
because
anything.
we
Yeah,
are
we
still
can just
listen. Go ahead.
right, going a little bit backwards. We didn't talk about the beta screen.
No.
About the beta screen as something different from the contact barrier, right? Bion calls a beta screen a screen, as the expression says, made up of beta elements and not alpha elements. And beta elements, you will remember, are just raw stimuli, right? Meaningless stimuli.
But not unconscious.
They're not unconscious,
okay.
because there is no unconscious, because there is no contact barrier.
Oh.
Right? We're talking of
Okay.
the psychotic personality now,
Okay.
where there is no contact barrier, but instead there is something that functions like a barrier. Bion calls that a screen, made up of beta elements. The image that came to my mind when I first read about that is in the times, I think it's still existing, I don't know, of the Cold War. You remember that there was a missile shield, that is that the Western world and America had in Europe set up so many missiles that if need be, someone pressed a button and hundreds of missiles would be launched onto the Soviet countries, right? Well, the beta screen is such a thing, is such a device made of beta elements. Imagine beta elements like the missiles that will get launched onto the other territory in order to put a boundary, to say, you don't come anywhere near me. Right? Look, I'm going to launch all this onto you, right? Clinically, the beta screen is made up, among other things, of nonsensical talk, right? The patient that talks non-stop, and what he says makes no sense at all. It's just bubbling up. The words may be there. I mean, you may recognize the words. They may be even full sentences that you would be mistaking as free associations, because the function they are to perform is not that the therapist would make any understanding of it, but rather to refuse, to reject the therapist who's being experienced as something dangerous and unwanted. The therapist having the unwanted ability to think, right? An example, extreme example of what the beta screen stuff is made of is Lewis Carroll's poem called The Jabberwocky. You probably know the Jabberwocky. That is a lot of words that have very interesting sounds but don't mean barely anything. Here and there you can recognize some relic of a word, but essentially it's nothing. It's Jab Jab the Jabberwocky, gyres and gimbals in the thoves. And you say, what on earth does that mean, right? Well, it does not mean anything, right? But a patient can even use words that for us have a meaning as evacuative explosive sounds, which brings us to today's chapter, right? That is, I'm not talking to you trying to make meaning, right? When a patient is very upset and says, what the fuck am I doing here? This is an explosive sound. It doesn't really mean anything sexual. Fuck doesn't have a sexual meaning in that context. It's just that this hard sound, what the fuck, right? I'm farting, right? Blandonu says it's like farting with my mouth to get something out that certainly will get into your ears as very unpleasant sounds and will set you up with some feelings of something ugly. You don't want to be talked that way, that a patient says, what the fuck am I doing here, right? Well, that is the kind of talk, right, the kind of use of words that form a beta screen, rather than an example of alpha function at work bringing out something that has a narrative, something that makes sense. It's so different. When a patient says, one thing is when a patient says, what the fuck am I doing here? The patient is very angry and is getting his anger out, from a patient that is saying, I had sex with my wife last night and it didn't go well. Well, that's different. There is a meaning in that. It's not explosive sound. The patient is bringing a conflict, right? It's narrating something that happens in the hope that the therapist can make some meaning of it. But you can't make much meaning of what the fuck am I doing here, other than saying to the patient, I think you're setting me up to feel mistreated, disrespected and angry, a way to get your anger out and make it my anger, right? This is just an evacuation. The other one is a communication. As you said, the projective identification can be used in one way and in another. So can verbal talk, or rather, so can words. You can use them to offend someone, you can use them to seduce someone, to excite someone, or to really communicate something, right? So let us go for a minute to what Blandonu tells us about this period of Bion, right? His notation system, and that was Bion trying, as Blandonu says, to create tools to make the observations of our sessions with patients as scientific as possible, knowing that our profession is not mathematics, right? It is not that precise, it's very subjective, but Bion wanted to find something that could help us make our subjectivity, our subjective observations more scientific, and something that would help us in our work, right? Would not only help us in relation to others, but in order to be a bit more precise, to sort of be able to note, to create a system of notation where we can classify different states of mind, both of the patient and of ourselves, to know where we are, what's happening. And that could also help as a shorthand, right, to say this is this and this is that. This is a communication, this is an evacuation, this is a thought, right? This is the patient's wish to know more. This is the patient's wish to lie to himself and not know anything at all, etc. To be able to make all these distinctions. At the same time, beyond meaning, this is how our minds work. Our minds can do all these things. They can go one way, they can go the other, they can get stuck, etc. And we can use our minds and the problems of our minds in different ways, right? Now, Bion, in his book, Learning from Experience and Later Elements of Psychoanalysis, wanted to create some very simple tools, really, and to make them, to give them to us so that we can use them in simple ways. He said, the elements of psychoanalysis are basically mainly three. There may be many others, but we can operate with just a few and we will be fine. If we have too many, we may get ourselves into a muddle. We may be in a sort of a spaceship that has so many buttons and lights that we don't know what we have to do first. But to keep it simple, he said three things. You remember what the elements were?
Love, hate, and knowledge. Love, hate, and knowledge.
Right. So one of the elements were the links, right? Love, hate, and knowledge. And he called them links because he said these basic emotions don't operate in the void. They operate in relation to someone. When you say, I love, you love someone or you love something. You don't love in abstractum, right? So he said, love, like hate, like knowledge, or rather, not knowledge as a noun, but knowledge as the interest to get to know, are links. You love something or someone, it's a kind of a link. You establish a love link, you establish a link of hate, right? Or you establish a link of knowledge, wanting to know, right? You remember that in the Old Testament, how was, for the first time, intercourse expressed in words?
Know somebody.
Exactly. Adam knew Eve, meaning they had intercourse. He penetrated Eve, and that was a way to get to know. So it's not the sexual drive that Bion privileges. He takes from the Old Testament the wish to know, to get inside an object to know. And certainly, if it's true, if Adam had intercourse with Eve, he got to know something about Eve and Eve's inside which he could not know before he had intercourse. How could he? Right? It's a way to get to know. It's a link, right? When we say, I want to know the works of Bion, that creates a link, a K-link between us and the work of Bion. Therefore, we want to get into it, we want to explore it, we want to, it's our wish to know, it's our K-link that moves us there. So LH and K are one of the elements of psychoanalysis, but there are two more, which are
myths and passion.
He said that I mentioned, but that's not one of the elements, myth and passion.
It's projective identification and the interrelation between paranoid schizo and depression.
All right, so
Position.
the other element is the relation, right, between the container and the contained, right, which, in other words, is projective identification. And you will hear all the Kleinens and contemporary Kleinens speak of projective identification again and again. When Capel came, I told this joke that Hinodo, a French analyst, said. He said, you just have to listen how long it takes